A peaceful mission turns deadly. The sleek diplomatic cruiser Concordia sliced through the inky void of space, its hull gleaming under the distant light of foreign suns. On the bridge, Captain Alara Vance stood tall, her sharp uniform a stark contrast to the myriad of readouts and displays surrounding her. "Status report, Mikhail," she called out to her second-in-command. Commander Mikhail Petrov, a bear of a man with a neatly trimmed beard, glanced up from his console. "All systems nominal, Captain. We're making good time to the rendezvous point with the Zorgan delegation." Alara nodded, her gaze drifting to the view screen where the unfamiliar constellations of the Zorgan system twinkled. This meeting was a chance to establish peaceful relations between humanity and the Zorgans, an insectoid race that controlled a sizable portion of the galaxy. If successful, it could open up new opportunities for trade, cultural exchange, and perhaps even a military alliance. As the Concordia approached the designated coordinates, a sense of unease crept up Alara's spine. Something felt off. The space around them was too quiet, devoid of the usual chatter of distant radio transmissions and engine signatures. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the bridge. "Captain, multiple contacts dropping out of warp," Mikhail shouted, his fingers flying across the console. "They're Zorgan warships, and they're powering up weapons." Before Alara could react, the Concordia shuddered violently as the first salvo of energy beams slammed into its shields. Sparks rained down from overloaded systems, and the acrid smell of burnt electronics filled the air. "Shields at 60%. Lieutenant Zhang reported from the tactical station, her voice straining to be heard over the chaos. "They're closing in fast." Alara gripped the arms of her command chair, her mind racing. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a rogue faction. This was a deliberate attack. But why? What did the Zorgans hope to gain by ambushing a diplomatic vessel? "Evasive maneuvers," she barked. "Get us out of here now." The Concordia lurched as it tried to pull away, but the Zorgan ships were faster and more maneuverable. They swarmed around the human vessel like a pack of hungry predators, their weapons firing relentlessly. Amidst the chaos, Alara's eyes met Mikhail's. In that brief moment, a lifetime of friendship and shared experiences passed between them. Then, a searing beam of energy punched through the weakened shields and struck the bridge directly. Alara was thrown from her chair, pain exploding through her body as she hit the deck. Alarms screamed and emergency lights bathed everything in a hellish red glow. Through blurred vision, she saw Mikhail lying motionless, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. "Mikhail," she cried out, crawling towards him. But as her fingers brushed his neck, she felt no pulse. Her friend, her right hand, was gone. Grief and rage warred within Alara as the Concordia shook itself apart around her. With a Herculean effort, she dragged herself back to the command chair. "All hands, abandon ship," she ordered, her voice rough with emotion. "Get to the escape pods." As the crew scrambled to evacuate, Alara's hands flew over the controls, plotting a collision course with the nearest Zorgan ship. If this was to be her end, she would make sure the Zorgans paid dearly for their treachery. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just as the Concordia was about to impact the enemy vessel, a brilliant flash of light filled the view screen. A warp rift, tearing open the very fabric of space-time. Whether by chance or design, the crippled Concordia fell into its embrace, vanishing from the battlefield. Alara's last thought before unconsciousness claimed her was of Earth. They had to be warned. The Zorgans could not be trusted. And Mikhail's sacrifice would not be in vain. The broken remains of the Concordia tumbled through the rift, carrying the survivors towards an uncertain future. But one thing was crystal clear in Alara's heart. There would be a reckoning. Earth receives the news. The United Council chamber was in an uproar. Representatives from Earth's myriad nation-states and colonies shouted over each other, their voices blending into a cacophony of anger and disbelief. At the center podium, High Counselor Aiden Zhou called for order, his normally composed demeanor showing cracks as he slammed a gavel against the lectern. "Please, ladies and gentlemen, we must have order." His voice boomed through the chamber's sound system. Reluctantly, the din died down to a low murmur as all eyes turned towards the High Counselor. "We are here today," Aiden began, his gaze sweeping across the room, "because of a grave development. As many of you have no doubt heard, our diplomatic mission to the Zorgans has been attacked." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The Concordia was ambushed without provocation, and many of her crew were killed or injured. The casualties was Commander Mikhail Petrov, first officer and second in command. The chamber erupted once more, representatives shouting their outrage and demanding action. Aiden held up a hand, silencing them. But there is a glimmer of hope amidst this tragedy. Captain Alara Vance managed to save the remaining crew and escape. She is here with us now, to give her first-hand account of the attack. All eyes turned as Alara stepped up to the podium, her uniform still bearing the scars of battle. Bandages peeked out from under her sleeves, and a deep weariness lined her face. But her eyes burned with a fierce determination. "Esteemed counselors," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of emotion behind it. "What happened to the Concordia was no accident. It was a deliberate, premeditated attack by the Zorgans." She went on to recount the details of the ambush, how the Zorgan ships had appeared from nowhere and opened fire without warning, how Mikhail had died defending the ship, and how they'd barely managed to escape. As she spoke, the atmosphere in the chamber shifted from shock to a simmering anger. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then, a representative from Mars stood up. "This is an act of war," he declared, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "The Zorgans have spat upon our offer of peace and friendship. They have spilled human blood. We must respond in kind." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. But Aiden Zhao held up a hand once more. "I understand your anger," he said, his voice heavy. "I feel it too. But we must not let our emotions cloud our judgment. An all-out war with the Zorgans could have devastating consequences for humanity." He turned to Alara. "Captain Vance, in your opinion, what is the best course of action?" Alara took a deep breath. "The Zorgans must be held accountable," she said firmly. "But High Counselor Zhao is right. A war would be costly and bloody. I propose we send a message to the Zorgan leadership. Demand that they turn over those responsible for the attack on the Concordia to face justice. Make it clear that there will be severe consequences if they refuse." Nods of approval greeted her words. Aiden Zhao smiled grimly. "Then it is decided," he said. "We will send our demands to the Zorgans, and we will make it very clear that humanity is not to be trifled with." As the council session adjourned, Alara felt a weight settle on her shoulders. She had set events into motion that could shape the future of humanity, and deep in her heart, she made a silent vow. For Mikhail, and for all those lost on the Concordia, she would see justice done, no matter the cost. The Zorgans refused to negotiate. In the opulent throne room of the Zorgan Emperor's palace, a tense silence reigned. The only sound was the clicking of the Emperor's clawed feet against the polished marble floor as he paced back and forth. Emperor Zal Thax was an imposing figure, his sleek, obsidian carapace gleaming under the light of the glowering orange sun outside. He turned his large, multifaceted eyes towards the holographic projection floating in the center of the room. It was a message from Earth, delivered in the cold, formal tones of a human diplomat. And therefore, in light of the unprovoked attack on our diplomatic vessel, the United Earth Council demands that you immediately surrender those responsible to face justice. Failure to comply will result in severe consequences. You have 24 hours to respond. Zal Thax let out a low, chittering laugh. "The arrogance of these humans," he mused. "They dare to make demands of us. They who have barely taken their first steps into the galaxy." His advisors, arranged in a semicircle around the throne, shifted uneasily. One of them, a smaller Zorgan with mottled green markings, spoke up. Perhaps, Your Majesty, it would be wise to consider their request. The humans are a young race, but they have proven to be resourceful. Zolfak's whirled on the advisor, his mandibles clicking in irritation. You would have us bow to their primitive threats. We are the Zorgan Empire. We have conquered 1,000 worlds, enslaved 100 races. What are these humans to us? The advisor backed away, head lowered submissively. Of course, Your Majesty. Forgive my impertinence. Zolfax turned back to the hologram, his compound eyes narrowing. We will teach these upstarts the folly of challenging their betters. Ready the fleet. If the humans want war, we will give them a war they will never forget. Light years away, in the heart of Earth's military command center, Alara Vance stood before a wall of screens, each one displaying a different part of the Zorgan border. She had traded her captain's uniform for the dark, utilitarian gear of a special operations commander. Around her, teams of analysts and strategists worked feverishly, poring over data from scout drones and long-range scans. The mood was tense, electric. Everyone knew that the next few hours would decide the fate of humanity. A sudden commotion drew Alara's attention. On one of the central screens, a massive Zorgan fleet was assembling. Hundreds of ships, from small, darting fighters to immense, city-sized dreadnoughts. An analyst looked up, his face pale. They're not responding to our ultimatum. They're preparing for war. Alara felt a cold certainty settle over her. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but in her heart she had known. The Zorgans were too proud, too arrogant to admit fault. She turned to her team, her voice calm and clear over the rising din of alarm. Initiate Operation Strikeback. We're going in. Hours later, Alara found herself in the cockpit of a stealth fighter, streaking through the inky void of space. Behind her, a dozen more fighters, each carrying a hand-picked team of Earth's best and brightest. Their target, a key Zorgan military installation, a shipyard where many of the Empire's most fearsome warships were built. As they approached, Alara's sensor screen lit up with a swarm of red dots. Zorgan fighters, rising to meet them. Here we go, she murmured into her comm. Remember the plan. Get in, destroy the shipyard, and get out. And above all, come back alive. Earth is counting on us. With a deep breath, Alara plunged her fighter into the fray, lasers and missiles lighting up the void. The battle for Earth, for the future of humanity, had begun. And this time, there would be no retreat, no surrender. This time, humanity would show the galaxy what it was made of. Humanity shows its strength. In the dark heart of Zorgan space, the human strike team fought with a ferocity that stunned their insectoid foes. Alara Vance led from the front, her fighter dancing through the swarm of enemy ships, lasers flashing. Target locked. She called out over the comm, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Firing solution uploaded. All units, engage. As one, the human fighters peeled away, revealing a cluster of heavy bombers. Their bays opened, disgorging a swarm of glittering dart-like missiles. The missiles streaked towards the Zorgan shipyard, a massive spindly structure orbiting a bloated red giant. Its spires and docks bristled with half-finished warships, the might of the Zorgan war machine laid bare. The missiles struck home, burrowing into the shipyard structure before detonating in a series of blinding flashes. The yard shuddered, then began to break apart, spilling debris and atmosphere into the void. In the cockpit of her fighter, Alara allowed herself a grim smile. Target destroyed. All units, fall back to the carrier. We're done here. As the strike team disengaged, the Zorgan fighters swarmed after them, desperate to exact revenge. But the humans were too quick, too coordinated. They slipped away, leaving only wreckage and frustrated rage in their wake. News of the attack spread like wildfire through the Zorgan Empire. In the opulent halls of power, advisors and courtiers whispered to each other, their voices tinged with a new emotion. Fear. The humans, they muttered. How could they strike so deep, so precisely? What kind of monsters are they? Emperor Zolthax raged at the news, his carapace flushing the deep, angry crimson. I want those responsible found. He snarled at his cowering subordinates. I want them brought before me, so I can tear the flesh from their bones. But as more reports filtered in, even the Emperor's rage began to cool, replaced by a grudging, fearful respect. The Zorgan listening post, hidden in the heart of an asteroid field, destroyed by a single human infiltrator. A supply convoy, ambushed and annihilated by a handful of human ships, their exotic weapons cutting through Zorgan shields like paper. A ground assault on a Zorgan colony, the human soldiers moving with a speed and precision that seemed almost mechanical, leaving only silent corpses in their wake. Across the Zorgan Empire, a new name began to circulate, whispered in the dark corners of seedy spaceport bars and in the plush lounges of the elite. The Terran Ghosts, the Reapers from Earth, the Nightmare Men. Humanity, it seemed, was not content to sit back and wait for the Zorgans to strike. They were taking the fight to the enemy, and they were winning. Back on Earth, the mood was one of grim determination. In factories and shipyards across the planet, men and women worked around the clock, churning out ships, weapons, and supplies for the war effort. In the halls of power, politicians and generals pored over maps and strategy, planning the next move in this deadly game of chess. And in the hearts of the people, a fire burned, a fire of anger, of determination, of fierce, unyielding pride. They had been underestimated, dismissed as primitives and upstarts. But now, the galaxy was learning the truth. Humanity would not go quietly into the night. They would not vanish without a fight. Humanity would not go quietly into the night. They would not vanish without a fight. They would stand, they would fight, and they would win. For Earth, for their fallen comrades, for the future. The Zorgans had started this war, but humanity would finish it on their terms. The galaxy would never be the same. The tide turns. In the skies above Earth, a maelstrom of fire and metal rage. The Zorgan invasion fleet, a vast armada of gleaming ships and bristling weapons, had finally arrived, ready to crush the upstart humans once and for all. But Earth was ready. From hidden bases on the moon and in the asteroid belt, human ships poured forth, a motley assortment of sleek fighters, bulky frigates, and heavily armed dreadnoughts. At their head flew the Retribution, a massive battleship bristling with the most advanced weapons humanity had ever created. On its bridge stood Alara Vance, her eyes hard and determined as she surveyed the battlefield. "Units, this is Admiral Vance," she said, her voice carried to every human ship by the fleet's quantum entanglement communicators. "The Zorgans think they can break us. They think they can make us kneel. But they're about to learn just how wrong they are." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Remember what we're fighting for. For our homes. For our families. For the memory of those we've lost. And for the future. A future where humanity stands tall and proud among the stars." A chorus of acknowledgments filled the comm channels as the human fleet surged forward, weapons primed and ready. The Zorgan ships responded in kind, their strange, organic-looking weapons glowing with sickly green light. They outnumbered the humans 3-1, their ships larger and more heavily armed. But the humans had a few surprises in store. As the Zorgan fleet closed in, dozens of small, unmanned drones detached from the human ships and sped towards the enemy. The Zorgans, confused by the tiny, seemingly harmless craft, ignored them until they started to explode. Each drone carried a payload of ultra-high-yield antimatter, turning them into miniature suns that blossomed in the heart of the Zorgan formation. Ships were vaporized instantly, while others were sent careening out of control, their hulls peeled open to the vacuum of space. The Zorgan advance faltered, thrown into chaos by the unexpected attack. And that was when the human fleet struck. Moving with perfect coordination, they sliced into the disarrayed Zorgan lines, their weapons tearing into the alien ships with ruthless efficiency. On the bridge of the Retribution, Alara watched the tide of battle shift, a fierce grin on her face. The drones had been her idea, a way to level the playing field against the Zorgans' superior numbers and firepower. But the battle was far from over. The Zorgans quickly adapted, their ships forming up into tighter, more defensive formations. They began to target the human ships with concentrated fire, whittling away at their shields and armor. One by one, human ships began to fall, consumed by the relentless Zorgan onslaught. The Retribution shook as it took a direct hit, alarms blaring across its bridge. Shields at 30%. A crewman shouted over the din. "We can't take much more of this." Alara gritted her teeth, her mind racing. The Zorgans were too many, too strong. At this rate, even with the drones and their superior tactics, the human fleet would be overwhelmed in a matter of hours. They needed a miracle. And as she stared out at the raging battle, Alara suddenly realized that they might just have one. "The Dreadnought," she exclaimed, pointing at the massive Zorgan flagship that loomed at the heart of their formation. "If we can take it out, the rest of their fleet will be thrown into disarray." Her crew looked at her in disbelief. The Dreadnought was a monster, easily 10 times the size of the Retribution, and protected by the strongest shields they had ever seen. To attack it directly would be suicide. But Alara's mind was already racing ahead, formulating a plan. "We don't need to destroy it," she said, a fierce glint in her eye. "We just need to cripple it. And I know just how to do it." As she outlined her plan, her crew's expressions shifted from disbelief to determination. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was also their best, and only, chance. Under Alara's direction, the Retribution began to move, drawing the attention of the Zorgan fleet. It wove through the battle, taking hits but never slowing, always keeping the Dreadnought in its sights. And then, at the critical moment, a small, nondescript ship detached from the Retribution's hull. It was a boarding craft, packed with Alara's best soldiers and armed with the most cutting-edge human tech. As the Retribution and the rest of the human fleet engaged the Zorgans in a fierce, all-out assault, the boarding craft slipped through the chaos, unnoticed and unopposed. Its target, the Dreadnought's main engineering bay, where a single well-placed charge could disable the entire ship. It was a mission from which many would not return. But as the craft sped towards the looming bulk of the Dreadnought, Alara knew that every man and woman aboard understood what was at stake. The future of humanity hung in the balance, and they would give everything, sacrifice anything, to ensure that future was one of freedom and victory, no matter the cost. The galaxy reshaped. Silence reigned on the bridge of the Zorgan Dreadnought, the ominous calm a stark contrast to the raging battle outside. Emperor Zalthax stood at the center of the room, his compound eyes fixed on the holographic display of the battle. His mandibles twitched as he watched his ships dwindle, picked off one by the relentless human assault. "Your Majesty," a quivering voice broke the silence. It was the ship's chief engineer, his carapace a sickly pale hue. "We have a breach in main engineering. Human soldiers have boarded the ship." Zalthax whirled, his eyes blazing with fury. "Then seal it off," he snarled. "Flood the compartment with toxin, incinerate them. I don't care. Just stop them." But even as he spoke, a deep, ominous rumble shook the ship. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the bridge into darkness. Emergency lighting clicked on, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. On the display, the Dreadnought's icon blinked, then began to fade. Damage reports cascaded in, painting a picture of utter catastrophe. Main power offline. Shields collapsed. Engines unresponsive. The human boarding team had succeeded. The Dreadnought, the pride of the Zorgan fleet, was dead in space. Zalthax stood frozen, his mind refusing to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster. This couldn't be happening. He was the Emperor of the Zorgans, the ruler of 1,000 worlds. He could not be defeated, not by these upstart primates. But as the ship shuddered under the impact of human weapons, the horrible truth became inescapable. The battle was lost. The invasion had failed. Zalthax felt something inside him break, his iron will shattering like glass. "Retreat," he whispered, the word tasting like ashes on his tongue. "All ships, retreat." In the heart of the battle, Alara Vance watched in disbelief as the Zorgan fleet began to disengage, their ships limping away from Earth in a ragged, disorganized rout. They had done it. Against all odds, outgunned and outmatched, humanity had stood firm. They had faced the full might of the Zorgan Empire and emerged victorious. But as the Retribution's crew erupted into cheers around her, Alara felt a sudden weight descend on her shoulders. They had won the battle, yes, but the war, she knew, was far from over. In the weeks and months that followed, the true scope of their victory became clear. The Zorgan Empire, once thought unassailable, began to crumble, torn apart by internal strife and rebellion. The vassal races, long chafing under Zorgan rule, rose up, emboldened by humanity's example. One by one, the Empire's holdings fell. The once mighty Zorgan war machine reduced to a shadow of its former self. And at the center of it all stood Earth, bruised and battered but unbroken. No longer the upstart newcomers, they were now the undisputed masters of the galaxy, their influence and power felt on 1,000 worlds. But for Alara Vance, the victory was bittersweet. As she stood before the towering memorial erected in honor of those who had fallen in the war, she couldn't help but think of all they had lost. She thought of Michael, her friend and comrade, cut down in the prime of his life. She thought of the countless soldiers, pilots, and crewmen who had given their lives to secure Earth's future. Their sacrifices would never be forgotten. Their names would live on, etched into the annals of history. And as she looked out over the sea of faces gathered for the memorial, a mix of human and alien, all united in their grief and their gratitude, Alara felt a fierce surge of pride. They had faced the worst the universe could throw at them, and emerged stronger. They had proven to the galaxy, and to themselves, the indomitable strength of the human spirit. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be new challenges, new threats, new frontiers to explore and conquer. But one thing was certain: humanity would face them together, united and unafraid. And the galaxy would never be the same. The end.